All right, did Aleph with Aleph, 11a. So yesterday, the Gemara commented on the story of Miriam, the context of measure for measure in the positive. She waited for Moshe Rabbeinu for her brother while he was in the basket as a baby for an hour, and therefore the community, the entire Jewish people, waited for her many years later. When they're traveling in the desert, they waited 7 days for her to become pure. So the Gemara now takes us on a sidebar, on a kind of like a, I don't like to use the word tangent because in Torah everything is precise and it's not just random, but might call it a tangent, or like, going off to the side, trailing off to other discussions, namely the discussion.
Sorry, that usually happens because there's some connection between.
Yeah, so it could be, as the word implies, tangential connection. But obviously, when you dig deeper, there's much deeper connections. But on the surface, it's just a tangential. Is that the word?
Tangential.
Tangential. Here, pronounce the word connection. And that before we're talking about the narrative of the Jews leaving Egypt, the beginning and then the end. Moshe Rabbeinu in the basket towards the beginning, and then later the Jews waiting for Miriam for 7 days. So now the Gemara is going to comment in general on the Jews' story, the narrative of the Jews in Egypt. And that's kind of the connection on the simple level. We're going to see that actually measure for measure is going to come up as well. So there is like this deeper current and the connections. But the Gemara backs up way to the beginning of the narrative, namely to when Yosef dies and a new king arrives, and that's when the decree begins. That's when the story begins. After the Jews moved down to eat, the children of Israel, the 12 tribes and their children, 70 people total, moved down to Israel, including Jacob himself, because Yosef is second to the king, right? Yosef is very powerful, obviously, so the Jews are protected so long as he's alive. And then when he dies, the Pharaoh says, these people are getting too powerful, we got to do something about it.
That's a dispute.
So there's the discussion the Gemara is going to have on exactly what this means. And the verse says, there's a new king that arrived. And that's, you may know it from Rashi's commentary in the Chumash, and Rashi gets that commentary from here. So the verse reads, so it's looking at the wider set of lines, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. After the colon, there's a little 15. In my book, maybe in your book, there's a tesvav. It says vayakam, right after the third word, just after the colon. Fourth word. Okay. So the verse reads, vayakam melech chadash. After Joseph dies, a new king, a new Pharaoh arrives in Egypt. So the Gemara says as follows, Rav and Shmuel, two scholars of the early era, right? The entirety of the verse reads, vayakam melech chadash on Mitzrayim, and a new king arose upon Egypt, asher lo yodas Yosef, which did not know Joseph. That's literally the translation. So the Gemara says that Rav and Shmuel, two of the great scholars of the Gemara, of the early generation of the Gemara, the first, or in some ways maybe the second, if you count Rabbi Yochanan generation as the first, early generations of the Gemara, founders of two schools in Babylonia, Sotah and Pumbedisa. Those schools lasted for centuries, well after the Gemara, or well after the Gemara's final redaction, it still kept on going. Right, Sotah and Pumbedisa. Okay, so Rav and Shmuel are discussing this verse, and the Gemara doesn't tell us who said what, but the Gemara tells us what their discussion was. Chad Amar, one said, Chadash Mamish, literally a new king. Chad Amar, one says, Shenischachu Gzeirosav, that is a new attitude. So it's like a new king because it's a new attitude. Literally, Shenischachu Gzeirosav, he renewed his decrees. Not as an actually new king, it's the same person. But he renewed his decrees. I'm looking for Rashi's comment on the side here. Not yet. Okay. The Gemara goes on to say, Manda Amar Chadash, the one who said literally a new king. Why did he conclude that? Well, because the verse reads Chadash, because the verse says new king. So new king means new king, period. Now, Manda Amar Shenischachu Gzeirosav, and the one who said, well, it's not a new king actually, but the king renewed his attitude, he renewed his decrees.
It's like a new king.
Because it's like a new, not an actual new king. He just renewed his attitude, a new era in his kingdom, because he changed his attitude, he changed his decrees. started treating Jews differently, started treating people in generally differently. So why does he come to that conclusion? Why doesn't he just stay with the fact that there is a new king? Because the verse says new king. Says the Gemara, because the like siva yomos v'imlech. It doesn't say, and the first, one king died and the next king, a new king took his place, which is ordinarily the way in which the verse will introduce a new king. Vayamas, the king died. Vayimlech, and another king arose to fill his place.
That's what it usually says.
So usually would say when there's a change in power. It doesn't say that. So even though it says new king, it doesn't say that the old king died. So therefore we say this king renewed his kingship because he has a new decree, a new attitude. Now, likewise, the same two were having the same discussion. Or I'm sorry, the Gemara doesn't say so explicitly, but seemingly the Gemara says, okay, let's just read the next comment and you'll tell me if you think it goes to Rava and Shmuel or it goes to both of them or just to one of them. Okay, so the end of the verse says, right, there was a new king who arose, Asher lo yodas Yosef, who should not know Yosef. So the Gemara comments and says, not that he actually didn't know Yosef, but it's as if he didn't know Yosef. Not that he actually didn't know him, but he behaved as if he didn't know him. Okay, so is the Gemara explaining just the opinion which says that there's literally a new king? That there's the same king? In other words, if it's the same king, then definitely you can't say he didn't know Yosef. It's the same king. Obviously, he knew Yosef. He was there with Yosef just before Yosef died. He was if it's the same king, then certainly he knows him.
Right.
Because he was his viceroy. So
it's hard to read the literal text otherwise.
Exactly. So it must be that he made as if he didn't know him and treating the Jews horribly, acting as if he didn't know that Yosef before was the guy who saved the whole entire country. What about according to the other opinion, which says that it's actually a new king? Does it mean that literally he didn't know Yosef? Or is this interpretation that he made as if he didn't know Yosef also applies to the opinion which says there's literally a new king? I could see it both ways. I could see on the one hand, look, it's a new king. He didn't know Yosef. Finished. He didn't know Yosef because it's a new king. On the other hand, you're a new king, therefore you don't know the history of the king just before you.
I think it means he didn't know him personally. He wasn't
Right. So it could be that way. This new pharaoh didn't know Yosef
He
personally.
could be a young king.
That's right. So maybe he didn't know Yosef personally. That's one way. Or in other words, this interpretation can go both. In that the new king didn't know Yosef because he knows the history of the king just before him. He just made as if he didn't know him. So it's possible that this phrase actually goes according to both. Now, take the Chumash there for yourself. I want to look at the Pasuk because it's something very interesting. Rashi quotes this commentary, and I want to see how exactly Rashi quotes it. So the verse is I'm going to put it up on my text. I'll look at screen. The verse is Shmois, Exodus 1:8. So let's do Chabad.org. Chumash. It's Exodus 1:8.
1:8.
Yeah, Exodus chapter 1, verse 8.
Okay. Yeah.
You got it?
Yeah.
So let's show Rashi here on my screen. Okay, so look at the Rashi there on 8. Vayakam al Chadash. He quotes the verse. Rabbi and Shmuel Amar Chadash. Rabbi and Shmuel are discussing Chadam Chadash Mamash. One said literally a new king. And then Rashi says Asher lo yada, right? Who didn't know? He made as if he didn't know him. Rashi says it just straight up as if it belongs to both opinions. That's the way it seems from Rashi. Rashi doesn't say, again, the discussion, right? Rashi quotes the discussion between Rav and Shmuel about whether it was actually a new king or that the king renewed his decrees, right? He quotes that. And then the next Rashi just quotes our next Gemara, which says, he makes as if he didn't know. He made as if he didn't know Yosef. As if it goes to, yes, as if it goes to both opinions. That he made as if he didn't know him.
Sorry?
That he made as if he didn't know him.
So he's arguing that
both opinions. No, 1 second. That's what I'm saying. First, Rashi quotes the dispute as to whether it's actually a new king or he renewed his decrees. So Rashi first quotes both. And then Rashi says in the next Rashi, when the verse says, Asher lo yoda, that he didn't know, Rashi explains, he made as if he didn't know. So I'm suggesting, because Rashi doesn't quote again the discussion by saying, according to the opinion which says he's a new king, he didn't know him, actually. According to the opinion that says he was a new king that renewed his decree, he made as if he didn't know him, right? I'm suggesting, therefore, Rashi is saying that this second interpretation, which said that he acted as if he didn't know him,
Let's interpret the second verse.
the second half of the verse, is actually according to both opinions. Follow what I'm saying or not really?
Well,
There's two discussions in the Gemara.
In the second verse, Rashi was leaning towards that he acted as if he didn't know.
Right, but
So
he acted as if he didn't know. It could apply also to the new king.
It could also apply to
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to apply only to the same king. It could apply to the new king as well.
As if he didn't know, it could also apply to the new king?
Yes, because the new king knows the history. The guy's still alive. Well, he's not alive anymore, but he just died. You don't know the history of your country from literally a couple of years ago when there was a famine and there was this guy Yosef who saved the whole country. You're a new king. You don't know the history. So even the new king had to act as if he didn't know him. Is that what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying.
Exactly. So I'm saying that you could learn the Gemara in theory.
Either way.
Exactly. So you could learn the Gemara that when the Gemara said that he acted as if he didn't know him, it's only talking according to the opinion which says that it's the same king. But I'm suggesting from Rashi on Chumash, where Rashi just quotes the statement without qualifying which opinion it goes to, that actually, whichever way you say it, whether it was a new king literally, or it's the same king that renewed his decrees, both of them actually knew Yosef, but acted as if they didn't. That's what I'm suggesting. That's what it seems to me. Now, also, I'm going to share with you. Yeah. I think it is. I'm saying I think from the fact that Rashi,
Either Shmuel or Rabbi,
according to both of them, you have to say that the new king, whether it's an actual new king or not a new king, they didn't actually not know Yosef. They must have known Yosef. They just behaved as if they didn't know Yosef. Even if you're a new king, you would still know Yosef. The guy was the viceroy just before you. He saved the country just before you. You don't know. I'm like, it'd be strange to say that he actually didn't know.
It's not so important that it's a new king or not. What's important is that they knew who he was, and they chose to ignore the history. Perhaps not.
Yes, that's correct.
They knew him.
That's right.
In some way, whether he was the existing king or new king, they knew the history, as you say.
Right.
So in either way, they chose to ignore his good.
Yeah.
That's not really the point here.
Yeah. Now I don't remember all the details.
Okay.
Yes, but you're correct. Now I want to share with you something. I don't remember all the details too, but it's still very interesting. So I'm going to share with you the main point, but I don't want to botch it. So there's a beautiful talk from the Rebbe on this Rashi, on these Rashis. And the Rebbe connects it to another dispute between Rav and Shmuel. Maybe does it come over here? There's a number of different disputes that Gemara is going to quote here from Rav and Shmuel. I don't remember where that is. Anyway, there's machlekes when the verse says that our forefathers are buried in Ma'aras HaMachpelah. The word Machpelah means doubled. And I want to make sure I get this correctly. I'm doing this in memory, so maybe I got this a little not perfectly right, but the content of what I'm saying is definitely generally correct. So another discussion between Rav and Shmuel. One says that it's literally doubled as in one cave instead of another. The other one says that it's one on top of the other, like two-story. Pretty sure that's what it is. Right? Where's the Pasuk? You can find that the Pasuk is in Bereshis. Let's see. No chapter would be, let's just guess. Would be Parshas. It would be the Parsha of where is he buried? Chaye Sarah. Right? Chaye Sarah. So let's look in which chapter we're doing.
Chapter 23.
I'm looking at 24 here. Yeah. Let's see, maybe. Sorry?
Talking about purging the field.
Yeah, it's in 23.
Chapter 23.
Yes, it's 23. We found it here. Let's see.
Like field, verse 17.
Yes, let's go scroll down. Oh, yes. So the verse says, give me the cave, the double cave, Mars Machpelah, says Rashi, a structure with an upper story over it, 2 floors. Another interpretation, it was so called because it was doubled with couples. Oh, sorry, not a cave inside of the cave, but you have couples in there. There we go. There's the answer. And this Gemara, as this discussion is also Rav and Shmuel in the Gemara in Eruvin, 53a. I believe it's Rav and Shmuel there also. I'll look it up quickly. Gemara in Eruvin. Yeah, you're not going to have it. It's Eruvin 53b. Anyway, I'm looking it up now, but the bottom line is that the Rebbe basically says, the Rebbe gives what's referred to often as a lishitasa. Lishitasa means when you take 2 disputants that have disputes throughout.
What's the name? Sorry.
Rav and Shmuel.
No, that
term. In Hebrew it's lishitasai. Lishitato in modern Hebrew. Basically, it means each according to their view, which is our study in which you take disputants that dispute throughout Talmud, and you give them you assign, as it were, what is the underlying nature of the dispute, and you explain all the disputes based on this one underlying difference.
Oh, the source.
The commonality between all their arguments. That's basically what you're doing. So what do we say? 853a, right? So yeah, it's Rav and Shmuel again. Yeah, it's Rav and Shmuel discussing. Okay, so the Rebbe does this to a number of disputants. The Rebbe does this, for example, for Hillel and Shammai. There is a beautiful talk in which he goes through, 10 disputes between Hillel and Shammai and gives a running shared commonality between all the disputes, that they're all centered on the same issue. And not only that, the Rebbe actually goes through each one and explains why, even though they have the same argument, each one adds a nuance that the other argument doesn't have. In other words, if it's the same argument, why not just argue once and you know their argument throughout the whole thing? Why argue every single time, right? So it explains that their argument is the same at the root, but each new argument adds another nuance. It's a very beautiful, deep talk. Same thing the Rebbe does with Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Shimon disputing throughout Talmud, as well as Rav and Shmuel. Now, in the case of Rav and Shmuel, the Rebbe says as follows. The dispute is a question of, do you go by the context or the literal meaning? If you go by the literal meaning, then the verse is new king is new king. If you go by context, then it's not a new king, because it doesn't say one died and one ruled in his place. And the same thing is true with the Mars Machpelah, the doubled cave. If it's literal, it's double cave. If it's not literal, given the context, I don't remember if it's literally double, then it has to be a double story, 2-story cave. One over the other, because it's literal, double cave. But if it's a question of the context, and the context is, I think, from correctly, the context is.
You said it was side by side, right?
Actually, see, this is interesting. Now I'm remembering more. Rashi said one interpretation is one story on top of another, and the other one is because there's couples in there, right? Whereas the dispute in Eruvin about Rav and Shmuel is actually, like I said, one is 2 rooms, one inside the other, and the other one says one on top of the other, right? And then the Gemara says, so according to the one who says that it's one cave on top of the other, that's the meaning of the word Machpelah, double. But according to the one who says it's 2 rooms, why is it called Machpelah, a double cave? Even ordinary houses have 2 rooms. So what makes it a double cave? It's double because there's couples there. Adam, Chava, Avram, Sarah, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yitzchak, Rivka, Yaakov, Leah. So that Rashi just jumps to the conclusion of the Gemara, even though the Gemara has a deeper discussion before then. Because if you say it's because of couples, then that interpretation actually says it's one cave inside of another. Follow?
I think so.
In other words, the Gemara says like this. It's Gemara about double cave. Either it's one on top of the other, 2 stories, or one inside of another.
Like an antechamber.
Like an antechamber, 2 caves. Now, the Gemara goes on to say, if it's one room inside of another, there's nothing unique about this being a double cave.
Right. All houses are like
every house has one room inside of another.
Why would you call it
exactly. Why would you call it a doubled house?
So that wouldn't work.
Exactly. So therefore, why is it called doubled? It's called double because there are couples there. Because the couples are buried there. Of the Machava.
Or one on top of the other, right?
That's the other opinion.
Right.
So 2 opinions. One opinion says one top of the other. That's why it's called double. Or it's actually one cave inside of another. And why is it called double? Because there's couples in there.
Right.
Okay?
Not because it's one inside.
Not because of one side the other, because that's right.
Ordinary scenario.
Ordinary scenario is one side the other. That's correct. Now, So the Rebbe basically goes on to say that the dispute between Rav and Shmuel, Rebbe explains this throughout many different disputes between Rav and Shmuel, is whether you go by context or by literal meaning. If it's literal meaning, then doubled cave means one on top of the other. Or actually, no, sorry. I don't remember specifically, but I think it means double means one on top of the other.
Yeah, because we already ruled out the.
Right. But in context, it's more, I think this is what it never says there, that it's more appropriate that the reason why does Avram want it? Why does he want this cave? Because Adam and Chava are there. So therefore he's saying, I want this place, double cave. I want that cave that has Adam and Chava. I think that's what it is. Whereas, and the same thing over here. In a literal meaning, a new king is a new king. But in the context, it doesn't say that one king died. And therefore, context is better to say that it's not a new king. And there's the dispute.
Context, you sort of mean like inference?
Inference, yes. Take the word on face value. In and of itself, what does it say? New king, new king. Or context. What else does it say about what happened? It doesn't say, it's lacking other terminologies that would tell us it's an actual new king. So therefore, we're going to go with, okay, I don't know if we want context, but taking other words into consideration, which is context, I think, right?
Like
okay.
Look at the totality of the circumstances.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's
context. So I'm pretty sure I'm botching this talk. I remember reading it a long time ago, and it's a mind-blowing talk, but this is the kernel of it. Whether you go by context or you go by literal meaning. It never connects us to many different disputes. I remember specifically these two, about double cave and about this kingship business. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there are others that Rebbe discusses as well.
They wanted about, I don't remember if it was Shmuel in Shabbos, that Shmuel regards things that if there's no intent to do the thing that, as a consequence of doing something, some malacha occurs, but you didn't have an intent.
Malacha she'et sheichel gufa, where you're doing one thing and something else happens by accident. Yeah.
Like you're moving a piece of furniture and you make dents in the floor.
That's Rav and Shmuel? Or is that Yehuda and Shimon?
I think it was Shimon.
Yehuda and Shimon.
It's that one where it goes throughout the whole.
That's one, yeah. But not Rav and Shmuel. Not this one, but Rav and.
Not this one, but this has an example.
I think it's Yehuda and Shimon. That's another area where one would make a commonality between all the arguments. Yes. Yeah, but I don't think that's Rav and Shmuel.
No, it's not. It's Shimon.
I believe it's Yehuda and Shimon.
Shimon and Sages, I think.
Yehuda and Shimon, I think it is. Yeah. And I think the Rebbe discusses that with respect to the context of Yehuda and Shimon. That's a different one. Yeah. That's another one that's a recurring dispute that comes out. We have to find a common.
It's recurring.
That's correct. Anyway, okay, so that's just thought I'd share with that kernel of idea with you, even though the full beauty of it, I am basically failing to do. Actually, you know what you could do? That Chumash incorporates Rebbe's talks in it. So if you look at the English on the verse in Genesis, Genesis 23, verse 9. What does it say there? How does it translate? Yeah.
It says the cave. This cave, want me to read it aloud?
Yeah.
This cave was so named because A, there was a 2-level house nearby.
Right.
And B, the crypts in it were double, and therefore good for growing couples.
There you go. The crypts were double. There's actually double cave, yeah, so for couples.
So there was a 2-level house nearby it.
To what?
A 2-level house nearby it.
Okay, yeah.
That's one of the reasons why it was called there was a house nearby it. It's saying that was a 2-level house.
So the first one was because what? The first is because what?
There was a 2-level house nearby.
What was the first one though?
That was the first one.
Oh, the first one was a 2-level house nearby.
And then the second one was the double crypts.
Because it's couples. Does it go on to say anything else?
Suitable for growing couples. Abraham told the Hittites that he wished to buy this cave because it also had a place for him.
So in the context,
buried alongside Sarah.
So there you go. In the context, it makes more sense to say that he wants.
As well as places for future patriarch couples.
That's right. So in the context, it would make sense that it's called double because of the issue of couples, because he wants to be buried there also. But in taking the literal meaning, the cave itself is doubled, and that's why you'd give it 2 floors. See, again, it's a question of context versus literal meaning. The literal meaning is it's a double-storied cup, it's a double-storied cave. Double story means double story because it says doubled. But in the context, why would he care if it's a 2-storied cave? Why would he care if it's 2-storied? But if in context, it's what makes it doubled is because you can bury couples there, now it makes sense why he wants it. Because he wants to be buried next to his wife, and because he wants his future children, the patriarchs to also be buried with their wives as couples. So in context, it would make sense that it means double because of the couple, but in literal meaning, the cave is double. Maris Machpelah means the doubled cave. So in context, following?
Yeah.
I think that's what it
So
comes down to.
you're saying
Have to look up that
there's
talk,
a
but I think that's what it
dispute
is.
between when you take the text literally or by context.
Yeah.
Now, so Rob was,
It doesn't say who's who.
they don't say.
I'm trying to remember if the Rebbe
they don't
does.
say who's who, but that was essentially the gist of their argument, was one was taking it literally and one was
Taking the context, yeah. So I have to, I don't
But
remember,
the outcome was the same though, right?
not the same, not necessarily. Is it an actual new king or not a new king?
No, but
Does the cave have two
that's
outs?
irrelevant because both of them knew, they knew
Both,
Joseph, right?
that's a good point.
They
If
knew
both of them knew Joseph anyway.
They both hated him basically. They hated him, this is his nation.
Okay, I have to look up the talk again, but I would say though, I have to look up the talk again to see how they're addressing that. But I would say though, that even if it's a new king and the new king is behaving as if he doesn't know Yosef, even if he does, but at least we've retained something of the literal meaning that there's a new king. Even though we have to take the other one not literally. So it's a good point, and I was thinking about that. I have to look up the talk. I shouldn't really comment until I
Yeah, it's interesting because
look up that actual
their
talk.
arguments are to come out on an outcome that's totally opposite each other, fine. That's why you're arguing, because you want the outcome is to be different. It seems here the outcome is essentially the same.
Right, the outcome is anyway you're doing it not in context because
you
the
hate Joseph and his nation anyway.
I have to look up the talk to get the answer for that. But I somewhere in the back of my head I remember they're addressing that. Anyway, but it's just interesting. Thought I'd share that this interesting idea of context versus the literal word. It's something to keep in mind. And if I also remember correctly, the back of my head somewhere, there actually tells us which one's Rav and which one's Shmuel based on other disputes that they have. I'm not mistaken somewhere.
You could probably figure that out by knowing who leans towards literal.
Exactly. So you have to find other places in Talmud where Rav and Shmuel dispute and see who goes which way. If I remember correctly, Rebbe does that. This is all from memory. I should look it up. Anyway, okay, we'll look it up, God willing, and we'll have more answers for that tomorrow. Let's see, where are we? Okay, we'll stop over here because the Gemara now is going to go and analyze another verse, which we can do in its totality, God willing, tomorrow. Taking another verse, this actually the very next verse, where so a new king arrives, literal, not literal, who makes as if he doesn't know Yosef, and the next verse says that the king turns to his people and says, "These guys are getting too strong. What do we do?" So the Gemara is going to analyze that very verse that he turns to his people and says, "What do we do?" And the verse after that, which goes on to say, "Let's do something." The next two verses where he actually speaks to his people to convince them to enslave people. So that is going to be analyzed, God willing, tomorrow. Okay, wonderful day.